Hi everyone, welcome to Yoga with Heini. I'm Heini, and this week I'm going to lead you through a practice for releasing tension in the lower back. There can be many different things causing tension in the lower back, so we're going to go through some key areas and hopefully we can create some ease and release in your back. Let's get started. For this week's practice, a couple of props would be very helpful. So either some kind of a yoga strap or belt, or you could use a scarf or a towel as your strap. So a strap of some kind, and then also something that you could use as a yoga block. So it could be yoga block, but it could be also a cushion, some kind of a bigger pillow, it could be a bolster, or even some books. You could have a few books that you can stack on top of each other and use them as your yoga block. Just something we could put under the pelvis when we do supported bridge pose. So those two props would be really handy today. We are going to start from lying down on the back. So have some space around you, have your props next to you. We're going to use them in the beginning. And if you have them nearby, you don't need to come up to sitting to get your props. So as I said in the intro, there are different areas that can cause tension in the lower back. We're going to today release tension in the hamstrings, trying to go a bit towards the hip flexors as well, creating release there. And just let the spine move and trying to, with movement, ease tension in the lower back. If any movements, any poses create pain in your lower back, then always stop the movement, stop the pose. So don't push through pain. Listen to your back as we go through the practice. Once you are settled on your back, take just a moment to find an easy place for your feet. So leave a bit of space between your pelvis and your feet. Don't bring them too close. So your spine could find a natural, easy curve in the lower back. So we're not trying to flatten the lower back, but rather let the pelvis, the lower back, find their natural shape. And that often means that there's a small gap under the lower back because we have that natural arch in our lower back. And then just let yourself breathe here before we start to move. If you want, you could bring one hand somewhere onto your ribs where you can feel the lowest ribs, and maybe other hand closer to your belly, onto that softer part of the belly. And then just breathe towards the hands, allowing the ribs to move as you breathe in and out. Maybe feeling some movement down in the belly area as well. And allow each exhalation to be a release. Don't force, don't push the breath out. Allow it to be just a release. There's a big connection between the breath and lower back pain, tension in the lower back. So that's why we take a moment to focus on the breath and just trying to create easy flow of breath. So we're not tensing when we are breathing, but just allowing a natural flow in the breath. And allowing each breath to find its natural three-dimensional movement, three-dimensional space. So we have that sideways movements, that forwards and even backwards expansion as we breathe in. And then that release, that kind of sinking in as we breathe out. Let's take another breath or two here. And then as we start to move, we're going to stay lying on the back. And we're going to do a bit of windshield wipers movements first. So you can keep your knees bent, possibly let your feet be a bit wider than the hips. And now you could bring arms somewhere out to the sides, maybe a cactus shape or even a T shape, what feels comfortable in the shoulders. And then just start to swing the legs from side to side. And you can let your whole pelvis move from side to side too. And that might start to create some movement in the spine too, especially in the lower back. If shoulders come off the mat, that is very, very fine. So don't feel that you need to block or kind of fix any part of your body to stay on the mat. You might start to notice some gentle rotation coming up towards the neck. And you can allow the neck to twist gently too. More just observing how this movement feels than thinking that there would be a right or wrong way to do this windshield wipers movement. Let's do a couple more gentle swings. All the time observing how you feel and if there's a specific area that feels tense. And then you can slowly bring the legs back to center. And now we're going to go into a few bridge movements. So bring your arms down next to the sides. And this time you could bring your feet about hip width apart and bring your feet maybe a bit closer to the pelvis. You feel you can start to press the feet down. And before we go into the movement, check that you have your block or pillow, your cushion nearby or your books nearby so you can easily reach for them. First, inhale down on the mat. And then as you exhale, press your feet down and start to elevate your pelvis, your lower back off the mat. So now we're opening the front side, keeping the feet strong on the mat, opening a bit through that hip flexor line, but with an active form, with an active bridge. The back side engaging, your inner thighs engaging. So now if you feel this is really tight or causes any pinching in the lower back, you might be using your buttocks too much. Then check that you can balance the buttock activation with your inner thighs. If that doesn't help, just leave the pelvis lower down. You don't need to go very high up. Slowly with the next exhalation, lower the back, lower the pelvis down and just relax the buttocks, relax the thighs. Let the spine come back to its natural shape. I'll move this block to the other side so you can see. And then we're going to repeat this movement another 2 more times. So first inhale on the mat, start to press down through the feet. And as you exhale, continue pressing down through the feet. Elevate your pelvis, your back off the mat. And we are engaging the buttocks. I'm not saying that we don't use the buttocks. The buttocks are the strongest muscle here to elevate the pelvis off the mat. But make sure you're not squeezing with them too much. Again, keep inner thighs active. So we don't let the knees kind of drop out to the sides. The inner thighs are hugging towards the center line. This will balance the action of your buttocks. Because if we tense the buttocks too much, we might be pinching into the lower back. Allow that opening on the front side. Take another breath in this bridge. And then exhale, slowly release down. The bridge pose is a really nice way to strengthen the back line and to create some opening in the front line. Inhale on the mat, we'll do that 1 more time. As you exhale, pressing the feet down, elevate the pelvis, the back off the mat. So the weight is on your feet and your upper back, your shoulders. And again, inner thighs hugging towards the center line. Keep your big toes grounded, heels grounded. And make sure that you can still breathe. If you feel that it's impossible to breathe, you might be going too high up. One more breath here. And then exhale again, slowly release down. And for a moment, hug the knees in towards the chest and rock from side to side. Just a bit of counter movement for your lower back. So allow the lower back to round. And then we are going to do one more bridge, but this time it's going to be a supported bridge pose. So now bring your feet back onto the mat. And again, they could be about hip width apart. They could be even a bit wider when we do the supported bridge. So now we're going to slowly elevate the pelvis off the mat. Not very high up, but just so that you could reach for your prop, whether it's a block or a pillow or some books. Bring them under your lower back or pelvis and then lean the pelvis onto that support. Now I'm suggesting we're not going to go very high up, so this is a bit lower kind of bridge, so lower down than the active bridge was. And just see how you feel here. If this causes any pain in the lower back, maybe it's better to bring the pelvis just onto the floor and rest the pelvis down on the mat. But what might be happening here is we allow the buttocks to soften. We allow the hamstrings to soften. So we're not engaging the back side, but we can still create a bit of opening, release on the front side. If you want, you could bring arms overhead along the floor. And just breathe down towards the pelvis. Supported bridge can also create release in the pelvic floor muscles. Just let your breaths move all the way down to the bottom of the pelvis, all the way to your lower belly. If you sit a lot during your day, this is a very nice pose to release that hip flexor line, to release the lower back, the whole pelvic area. Because we are elevating the pelvis slightly off the floor, off the mat. And we are creating still a subtle back bend in the spine, but it's not an intense pose. And if you feel that this is very intense, then I suggest either using a lower support under the pelvis, or like I said, you could just bring the pelvis down to the floor and do the same pose we did in the beginning. Just breathing with knees bent, the pelvis down on the floor. Wherever you are in your pose, take a few more breaths in and out. And then if you have arms overhead, slowly release the arms, the hands back down next to your sides. Slightly press the feet down so you can elevate your pelvis off the block or pillow. Pull that block aside and then release the back, release the pelvis down to the floor. Either rest here or do a few windshield wipers just to give some sideways movement for the hips, the pelvis, the legs before we go into the next pose. Good, and then bring legs back to center. Now we're going to go to the hamstring area. So we're going to use the strap, or if you have a belt or maybe you have a towel as your strap, bring that strap to your hands, And first side, bring your right knee towards the chest. Keep your left foot on the mat. And bring your strap or your towel, your belt around the right foot. And then with that support, slowly start to lift the right foot up towards the ceiling. Now we are looking for a gentle stretch in the back side of the right leg. If you have a lot of tension in your hamstrings, that might cause tension in the lower back too, because this whole back line is connected. And if the hamstring is pulling in a lot, that might start to pull on the lower back, and it might put too much stress on the lower back. So now come to an edge where you feel there is a gentle stretch in the right hamstring, or maybe it's the whole back line of the right leg, and you might feel this as a stretch in the lower back too. Just make sure it's not too intense. You can keep the right knee bent, and sometimes that actually helps to send the stretch more to the hamstring. So feel free to play with bending, straightening that right leg, and just breathe. If this doesn't give you a kind of intense enough stretch, you could start to straighten that left leg, but often that creates a more intense stretch in that lifted leg too. So if that's too much, I suggest keeping the left knee bent. And we're just going to breathe here. Really conscious breaths, as if you could breathe into that right leg. If you have any issues with seated or standing forward bends, if they put too much pressure into your lower back, if they feel painful in your lower back, I suggest using this kind of a stretch first before you move on to those seated forward bends. Because like I said, it could be that there's a lot of tension in the hamstring, in the back of the leg, and that puts too much stress on the lower back. So those seated and standing forward bends could be too much to begin with, for the lower back especially. One last breath on this first side. And then slowly start to bend that right knee. Bring the knee towards the chest. Still keep your belt around the right foot. And then bend your left knee. So you bring the left knee towards the chest as well. And now change your feet so that your left foot comes into that strap, into that belt, and release the right foot onto the floor, onto the mat. And from there, with the support of the belt, we start to elevate the left foot up towards the ceiling. You might notice a big difference between the two sides. That is very, very normal. For me, this left side is much tighter on the back side. Again, you can play with bending or straightening that left leg. Sometimes bending the knee actually, again, creates a bigger stretch. So don't feel that you have to straighten the leg to get a full pose. Sometimes bending the knee is better and actually gives a more intense sensation. As you're holding the belt, try to keep shoulders as soft as possible. I think it helps if you can hold the strap as close to the foot as possible, because then you can just hang the arms quite relaxed. But see what works for you. Try not to tense the shoulders. Again, you have that option of extending the right leg, so the leg that is on the floor could be straight as well. It might make the pose in the left leg more intense too. So see what feels good on this side. And focus on the breaths. And really focus on releasing with exhalations. Almost like giving yourself a permission to release. giving the muscles permission to stretch with each breath out. Take another breath or two in and out on this side. And then slowly, slowly we start to release. We're going to bend the left knee in. And then just take the belt off around the foot. Put the belt somewhere aside. We don't need it anymore. Bring both feet down and take a couple of breaths in and out. You're just feeling that neutral spine, lower back resting in that neutral position. And then we'll come into a twist. And as we come into the twist, first side, we're going to bring both knees, both legs to the left side of the mat. And I suggest that we roll all the way onto the left side, keeping hips on top of each other. And then start to open your chest up towards the ceiling, opening the right shoulder, the right arm, but still trying to keep the hips about on top of each other. So looking for more of a twist from the upper spine to begin with. So slowly, slowly, as you release the spine further into the twist, maybe you start to feel it in the lower back too. But it's important to know that when we are twisting the spine, there is very little twisting movement coming from the joints of the lower spine. So actually the most twist we get from the mid back, the upper back, the neck. So don't force your lower back into a too big twist. Sometimes I think when we are trying to force the lower back into a too big twist, we actually start to cause more problems than easing and releasing in the lower back. So try to keep a lower back in a more supported place here, and keeping the hips in a more kind of neutral position might help the lower back to stay more stable as well. Or especially if you have any issues around the SI joints, try to encourage more of that twisting from the upper spine. Keeping that SI joint, that pelvic lower back connection more stable. Let's take another breath in and out in this twist. And then to close, to release this twist, first close your chest, come back onto your left side, and then keeping your spine, pelvis as one package, roll onto your back. And we move into the twist on the other side. So now we bring both knees to the right side. Again, bring your whole body onto the right side. So you can bring your hips to kind of on top of each other. And then think about chest opening. So we're really looking for more of that movement from the upper spine around the ribs. And it's very, very possible that your left shoulder doesn't touch the floor. That is very fine. We don't have to get both shoulders onto the floor. And breathe. Again, if you start to feel any kind of pinching, any pain around the lower back or that SI joint area in the connections between the pelvis, the lower back, just back off a bit. And really more encourage that opening in the chest. Don't force the lower back. And breathe in and out. If you have any issues in the lower back, it's still nice to twist. But trying to get that twist without irritating the lower back. And use the breath again. Send your breaths down to the belly. Send your breaths out to your ribs. If it feels safe, you could breathe all the way into the lower back. Let's take another breath or two in and out. And then, just like we did on the first side, to release the twist, close your chest, come back onto your right side, and now stay on your right side. And from there, bring yourself up onto all fours, onto hands and knees. And we're going to do some cat-cow movements here and a bit of disco cat movement to get the spine, the pelvis moving. So we're going to start rounding the spine, at the same time circling the chest and then arching the spine, coming into that cow pose, but we continue moving the chest out to the side. So we are circling the chest while we are arching and rounding the spine. Find your own disco cat, but the intention is to let also the pelvis to circle. So if it helps you to think of kind of creating circles in the air with your tailbone, you could also focus more on that. But really just letting the whole spine move, opening the sides, rounding and arching the spine. So our cat is dancing. That's the intention in our disco cat. And now from an easy place, change the direction of those circles. Continue to round and arch the spine and let the movement spread into your neck as well. Allow your neck, your hip to move as you're moving your back, as you're moving your pelvis. You can let your elbows bend if that helps you to move. Let's do another 2 circles. Another 2 times, rounding and arching the spine. And then let yourself find a neutral spine. Bring your back to center. And from all fours, we're going to lean into child's pose. So now lean your pelvis back towards the heels. You can let your knees open wider apart if you want. Child's pose will be our final pose. So make this a comfortable, easy pose. If you open your legs wider apart, it tends to be a more neutral shape for your back. So if you're looking for a more rounded shape, maybe a bit more of a stretch in the lower back, then try bringing your legs closer together, if that's okay for the hips, for the knees, and it creates a bit more of a rounded shape in the lower back. Arms could be above the head on the mat, or you could bring them down next to your legs. Where do you feel you could release the shoulders? Once you've found your child's pose, again focus on the breaths, this time breathing towards the back, breathing into your turtle shell. Just imagine your heavy pelvis sinking down towards the feet. At the other end of the spine, imagine or feel the heavy head sinking towards the floor, away from the pelvis. Creating a gentle opening along the back side of the spine. Also creating a bit more easy place for the hip flexors. So also focus on softening, easing, releasing at the front of the hips, front of the thighs, the lower belly area. Child's pose is often quite a nice
pose, quite relaxing pose if you have tension in the lower back. It creates a gentle stretch. At the same time, the back can release, so we're not stressing it by stretching too far. And child's pose can be a really, really nice kind of almost like initial stretch for the back before moving on to any seated or standing forward bends. I highly recommend using child's pose to create that initial stress and stretch in the lower back if it's very tense, if there is a lot of tightness in the lower back. Let's take another few breaths in and out. And then slowly, with your next few breaths, start to come out of that child's pose. And then find an easy seat. Now it could be that you sit on your shins, on your knees, or you could come into a cross-legged seat. If you feel that sitting on the floor is intense in the hips or lower back, you could use your pillow, your block under the pelvis, the same prop that you had in the beginning for that supported bridge pose. You could bring that prop under the pelvis, and that might ease your seated pose as well. Getting your hips just slightly above the knees often makes it a bit easier for the lower back, for the hips to kind of enjoy and settle into a seated pose. So this will be our final pose today. If you prefer Shavasana pose as your final pose, feel free to come lie down if a seat is not for you now. But wherever your final pose is, try to find neutral spine, allowing those curves in your spine, not flattening the spine. And just coming back to your breath, like we did in the very beginning of the practice. Allow your breaths to expand the ribs. Allow your breaths to move down towards the belly. And send your breaths all the way down to your lower back as well. And just allowing space for your breaths. Rather than pulling and pushing the breath. Let each inhalation sink in, kind of flow in, and let yourself release each breath out, not pushing the breaths out, just allowing the breaths to naturally flow out. Take another breath or two in and out. Or if you wish to continue your seated meditation or your Shavasana pose longer, you can still continue your practice. If it's now time to close your practice, if it's part of your practice, bring your palms together in front of the chest. And as always, at the end of the practice, thank yourself for taking this time to look after your lower back, your whole body. I hope that you found some ease and release in your back with this practice. And I thank you very much for joining in. Namaste.
Thank you very much. Good. Thank you so much for joining in. I do hope you enjoyed the practice. If you did, please give the video a thumbs up and leave a comment below. I really would like to hear how you feel now in your lower back after this practice, or if this practice gave you any new ideas how to look after your back. Also, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. There will be loads more yoga related videos and free classes coming up. Thank you, and I'll see you on the next video. Bye!